Howdy, folks. It's your friend Max Mogren reporting live for you from beautiful Alpine, Wyoming for Wake Up News. This is Wake Up Wyoming. Thank you so much for tuning in. We got a big show today. As you can see, my top headline there, NASA scientists propose geothermal energy development to save humanity from Yellowstone. I'm not worried personally about the Yellowstone volcano erupting, but the potential geothermal energy resource up there that has been shelved since 1872 when the U.S. federal government grabbed it. I've talked about that before. It's a fascinating topic, so we're going to cover that. Obviously, we're going to cover Charlottesville again. I have been amazed at the divisiveness this Charlottesville issue has had and the attempts to censor free speech. Obviously, I don't identify with neo-Nazis or the KKK. I do not support those organizations. But at the same time, like many of you, I'm a staunch supporter of free speech. So we're going to get into that, as well as looking at local coverage of the eclipse. You know, the big news, Jackson Hole, the eclipse. Interestingly, if you look back, especially in the ancient Indian, like the country India, astrology, they see an eclipse as a time of great transition and change. And here we have the first full solar eclipse crossing the U.S. continent. Tomorrow, right about this time, it's going to be peaking here in the Idaho area over Jackson Hole, the Teton Mountain Range. So it'll be interesting to see what happens for the whole country in the wake of this eclipse, right? Interestingly, here, everybody, typical modern American fashion, it's all about commercializing the thing, making as much money as possible off of the event. I've got some friends from California coming out, really looking forward to their arrival. Obviously not charging them to stay with me, but a lot of people in the Jackson Hole area have rented their houses out and are charging $1,000 or more a night for people to have a place to stay for this event. So all-time record crowds up in Jackson right now. Insane push to commercialize this event, and we're going to cover that as well. But moving on to our top headline, we're going to get into Charlottesville. That's a super volcano of its own, revealing these deep-seated emotional responses people have to the KKK, neo-Nazis and stuff. But first, we're going to cover the NASA thing. This is interesting. Again, I've mentioned before, Yellowstone, the Yellowstone caldera, Yellowstone National Park is the world's largest continental geothermal energy resource, right? Could be used to power the western U.S. theoretically, but instead it's been turned into Yellowstone National Park. The BBC reporting 2 days ago, NASA's ambitious plan to save Earth from the Yellowstone supervolcano. Okay, this is from the BBC. Lying beneath the tranquil settings of Yellowstone National Park in the U.S. lies an enormous magma chamber. It's responsible for the geysers and hot springs that define the area, but for scientists at NASA, it's also one of the greatest natural threats to human civilization as we know it, a supervolcano. I was a member of the NASA Advisory Council on Planetary Defense, which studied ways for NASA to defend the planets from asteroids and comets, explains Brian Wilcox of NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory at the California Institute of Technology. I came to the conclusion during that study that the supervolcano threat is substantially greater than the asteroid or comet threat. Now, me personally, and you probably as well, I don't think in the grand scheme of things, we really need to be worried about the Yellowstone supervolcano erupting anytime soon, but it is out there. When NASA scientists came to consider the problem, they found that the most logical solution could simply be to cool a supervolcano down. A volcano the size of Yellowstone is essentially a giant heat generator. Yellowstone currently leaks about 60 to 70% of the heat coming up from below into the atmosphere via water which seeps into the magma chamber through cracks. The remainder builds up inside the magma, enabling it to dissolve more and more volatile gases and surrounding rocks. Once this heat reaches a certain threshold, then an explosive eruption is inevitable. NASA scientists believe the most viable solution could be to drill up to 10 kilometers down into the supervolcano and pump down water at high pressure. The circulating water would return to the Earth, return at a temperature of around 662 degrees Fahrenheit, thus slowly, day by day, extracting heat from the volcano. And while such a project would come at an estimated cost of around $3.5 billion, it comes with an enticing catch that could convince politicians to make the investment. Yellowstone currently leaks around 6 gigawatts in heat, Wilcox said. Through drilling in this way, it could be used to create a geothermal plant, which generates electric power at extremely competitive prices. You would have to give the geothermal companies incentives to drill somewhat deeper and use hotter water than they usually would, but you would pay back your initial investment and get electricity, which can power the surrounding area for a period of potentially tens of thousands of years. And the long-term benefit is that you prevent a future supervolcano eruption, which would devastate humanity. Okay, it goes on and on. You know, obviously this is not going to happen anytime soon. Leanne Charlton chiming in, frack off, NASA agreed, stop fracking up the planet, Minnie with Trony. You know, I'm with you, Leanne, 100%. But at the same time, there's a big difference between fracking, which is really a disturbing practice, you know, in response to peak oil, in response to declining energy reserves, in response to less oil coming out of the ground globally. What's the response the U.S. did? Fracking. Fracking, horrible. Absolutely horrible. Injecting groundwater or injecting, you know, all sorts of carcinogenic chemicals into these old wells, cracking the Earth's crust, causing earthquakes, and putting all these nasty chemicals into the groundwater. None of us support fracking. But me, I am a proponent of geothermal energy. I'm not necessarily saying we should do this in Yellowstone, but it's interesting that NASA has been talking about it. The idea is to drill in from the supervolcano from the lower side, starting outside the boundaries of Yellowstone National Park and extracting the heat from the underside of the magma chamber. This way you're preventing the heat coming up from below from ever reaching the top of the chamber, which is where the real threat arises, Wilcox says. So just interesting, you know, like I said before, you know, I brought on this show before, I brought to light the fact that Yellowstone is this huge geothermal energy resource. It is. And geothermal power, like you see in places like Iceland, it's a lot cleaner than coal, natural gas, oil, and other fossil fuels, right? I'm not saying that we should do this in Yellowstone, but potential's out there. Moving along, we're on to the Charlottesville. Speaking of super volcanoes, I've been shocked, you know, I should say right now, the opinions I express on this show are mine alone, right? Here at Wake Up News, we've got a lot of contributors, and I'm just one of them. And I don't agree with the rest of the editors and contributors here on every issue, and they don't agree with me necessarily on everything. You probably don't agree with me on everything. And that said, in the wake of this Charlottesville thing, reading the comments both on Wake Up News and all over the internet, it's been shocking to see how divisive this issue has been, right? I don't support Donald Trump. I don't support the KKK or neo-Nazis. You know, I'm more likely to quote Bob Marley or Immortal Technique or Kay Reno than some Republican analyst, right? I'm not a fan of racism. I think all people have a little inherent racism in them. I think we all are experiencing the effects of centuries of systemic racism, and these things need to be addressed. But looking at the current situation, it's like a lot of the mainstream media is putting all this blame on Donald Trump. He's a symptom of the overall situation. He's not the cause of it, right? Removing Donald Trump from office is not going to eliminate racism in the United States, nor does his presence there as a figurehead for the military-industrial complex really empower racists any more than they already are, right? If we're going to talk about racism, we should look at the foundations of systemic racism. The fact that, you know, there are so many black people in jail as a function of the total percentage of the U.S. population, right? If we're going to talk about systemic sexism, we should talk about why women are paid less for doing the same job as men, right? These policies have been in place in this country for a lot longer than Donald Trump has been alive, right? And he's an old man. So again, I'm no Trump supporter. I am no KKK or neo-Nazi supporter. But at the same time, I'm a big proponent of free speech. Free speech is crucial. You know, if we didn't have free speech, if they're able to crack down on neo-Nazi and KKK websites, if Google and GoDaddy kill their domain names for hate speech, how long is it until they start coming after people who are just speaking what they believe to be the truth, right? Doug Meyer chiming in, Trump is just a puppet for the world's greed. I agree. Thank you so much, as always, for tuning in, Doug Meyer. Interestingly, we got an article out of Business Insider. People are asking why North Carolina police watched protesters vandalize a Confederate statue and then arrested them for it. Okay, this adds to, you know, the notion of this all being a spectacle, where in Charlottesville, the police were told to stand down. The Antifa and the Unite the Right protesters were able to beat each other up, and the cops just let it happen for a while. Interesting. Now I'm going to read a little excerpt from an article by Paul Craig Roberts. Now, Paul Craig Roberts, who's he? Well, he was the Assistant Secretary of the Treasury during the Reagan administration, right? I don't agree with Ronald Reagan. I think he was not a very positive force in the past of our country. But this guy, Paul Craig Roberts, I read his site quite a bit, and I think he's pretty on point. So I'm going to read a little of this. It's called "A House Divided Against Itself Cannot Stand." The liberal progressive left are enjoying their drunk fest of denunciation. I can't say I have ever witnessed anything like it. These are the people who sat on their hands for 16 years while Washington destroyed in whole or in part 7 countries. Not being satisfied with this level of warmongering and crimes against humanity, Washington orchestrated a conflict situation with Russia. Americans elected a president who said he would defuse this dangerous conflict, and the liberal progressive left turned on him. In contrast, 1 person is killed after the hated Charlottesville protest event was over, and there is endless absurd outrage against the President of the U.S. 3 New York Times prostitutes yesterday blamed the crisis on Trump, declaring him increasingly isolated in a racial crisis of his own making. Apparently, Trump is responsible for the crisis because he blamed both protest groups for the violence. But isn't that what happened? Wasn't there violence on both sides? That was the impression I got from the news reporting. I'm not surprised that Trump got the same impression. Indeed, many readers have sent emails that they received the same impression of mutual violence. So Trump is being damned for stating the truth. Now, if you've really, there's been so much commentary on Trump's comments about Charlottesville, it's a bit absurd. The Jackson Hole Daily providing a great example of that. A few days ago, they literally had 10 articles, not about what actually happened in Charlottesville, but about what Trump said about Charlottesville. And if you really watch his comments, he didn't say anything inherently racist. He didn't say anything inherently, fully supporting the KKK or neo-Nazis. All he said was there was blame on both sides. People were getting violent on both sides, which is true. Now, again, I'm no Trump supporter, and you probably aren't either. And I'm not apologizing for defending Trump, but it is shocking to see how the mainstream media has spun this thing, right? The guy just made a statement, and suddenly he's basically the grand wizard. You know what I mean? Let's assume that the impression Trump and many others got from the news is wrong. That would make Trump guilty of arriving at a mistaken conclusion. Yet he is accused of instigating and supporting Nazi violence. How is it possible to transform a mistake into evil intent? A mistaken impression gained from news reporting does not constitute a defense of white nationalist protesters. An assertion by the New York Times cannot turn the absence of intent into intent. What the establishment is trying to do is to push Trump into the arms of white supremacists, which is where they want him. You know, it's very easy to bash on Donald Trump. It's very easy to bash on, you know, overt, blatant, disgusting white supremacists. But I think it's more important that we look at the deep systemic roots of racism, sexism, and classism in this country. Clearly, there is no basis for this charge. It is a lie, an orchestration that is being used to delegitimize President Trump and those who elected him. The question is, who is behind this orchestration? The orchestration is causing people to run away from Trump, or is being used as an excuse to remove him, to further the plot to remove him from office. Trump's strategic and policy foreman, headed by Stephen A. Schwartzman, ran away, just as members of President Carter's center board deserted Jimmy Carter when he criticized Israel for its apartheid policy towards the Palestinians. The New York Times said that the New York Times says that the armed service troops are running away, and the entire Republican Party. Karen J. Bowden, timing and Trump has always been very racist. Interviews of him from the 80s and before clearly show this. You know, I agree with you, Karen. I'm not, like I said, I'm not defending Trump, but in this particular instance, he said something that wasn't overtly racist, and the mainstream media just pounced on him like hardcore. And it's just interesting. You know, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't really have a side on this, but it, you know, what disturbs me is how it is being portrayed, or how it's being used to kind of push an anti-free speech agenda. Karen J. Bowden chiming in too. The violence was very unbalanced, much more on Nazi side than on Antifa. Most stories I've read emphasize that Antifa were mainly operation in defense of peaceful counter-protesters. I mean, I just know what I saw from the video coverage that I watched. I watched the Unicorn Riot stuff. And, you know, I don't know who was beating on each other more, but like I said, to my eye, it looked like people from both sides were engaging in violent behavior. Moving along. The hypocrisy is stunning. For 16 years, the armed services chiefs, the New York Times, and the rest of the prostitute media, both political parties and the liberal progressive left, have participated actively or passively in massive crimes against humanity. Karen, I did watch the Vice video. You keep chiming in here. I've seen the Vice video, and to me it looks like it was a staged event, right? I saw the Vice video. Vice, we're going to get to Vice a little later too. The hypocrisy is stunning. For 16 years, the armed services chiefs, that's the military, the New York Times, and the rest of the prostitute media, both political parties and the liberal progressive left, have actively participated in massive crimes against humanity. There are millions of dead, maimed, and displaced people. That's true. The refugee crisis, the ongoing wars in Syria, Libya, Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, etc., etc. Yet one death in Charlottesville has produced a greater outpouring of protest. I don't believe it is sincere. I don't believe that people who are insensitive to the deaths of millions at the hands of their government can be so upset over the death of one person. Assume that Trump is responsible for the death of the woman. How much blood is it compared to the blood on the hands of Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and Obama? It seems clear enough that the outpouring of grief is an orchestration designed to delegitimize the president and the people who elected him. Members of the liberal progressive left are proclaiming that despicable people such as white nationalists should not be allowed to protest and should not be given a permit to protest. They forget that protest is a right. The U.S. Supreme Court settled the issue 40 years ago in 1977 by overturning an Illinois court order that blocked an extremist protest in Skokie, a Jewish suburb of Chicago. The Supreme Court ruled that protest is not limited by the fact that some people will be offended or by the chance that there will be violent reactions. Otherwise, whatever faction happens to be in charge can suppress dissent by everyone else. For decades, the liberal progressive left has invested heavily in driving people apart. Black studies, women's studies, and Native American studies can easily cross into propaganda that generates hatred. As a man of peace said, a house divided against itself cannot stand. Charlottesville has given us a debauchery of denunciation that proves that we are a divided nation. Does a nation so divided really want to be in conflict with Russia and China and Iran? If the U.S. is the institutionalization of white supremacy, as the liberal progressive left says, how can it be that Americans are simultaneously the exceptional, indispensable people with the right to bomb other people back into the Stone Ages? Obviously, there's a lot in this scenario that does not make sense. Okay, so it's a good point. Paul Craig Roberts making some really good points, right? There's all this outrage about one person dying, when at the same time, the U.S. is dropping bombs all over the world. And yeah, Donald Trump has continued those policies as expected, because he wouldn't be the president of the United States if he was if he was actively really 100% trying to change things. Karen J. Bowden chiming in. I always love your comments, Karen. Even if we disagree on one thing, that's what it's all about. It's about creating dialogue. Bottom line, all these skirmishes that mainstream media focuses on are distractions from the fact that wealth is being transferred to wealthy at faster rate than ever before. They don't want the disadvantaged to unite. Distraction equals divisions reinforced. Karen, thank you so much for the brilliant comment. I agree completely. Now, it's funny, Karen, you mentioned Vice, the Vice video. I watched the Vice video. It's important to note, Vice media is often, it's pretty edgy, pretty, countercultural looking, but people don't realize Vice is a media company valued at $5.7 billion. Okay, Vice is mainstream media. And if you look at their, I guess I would characterize them as kind of nihilistic. Like a lot of their coverage of all sorts of things is pretty, it's edgy, but it's also just like a little ha-ha, kind of revels in debauchery sort of coverage. And interestingly, Vice just put out an article the other way. Yeah, Karen chiming in, was the first Vice show I ever watched, and I did think parts of it were very selectively edited. Watching the Vice video made me believe that the whole thing was staged, or at least the Unite the Right protest, the way they covered it. But interestingly, an article came out of Vice a couple days ago that Zero Hedge critiqued. Let's blow up Mount Rushmore, says Vice. We may have hit peak media crazy here. A prominent online news publication says, let's blow up Mount Rushmore. No, this is not Al-Qaeda's Inspire magazine or the Islamic State's Dabiq propaganda publication. It's Brooklyn-based Vice News. On the same day a barbaric terror attack took place in Barcelona, resulting in 13 deaths and 100 people injured, the popular liberal news organization, known for its edgy investigative approach and stylistic cooler-than-thou appeal to millennials, tweeted out an article that advocates for blowing up Mount Rushmore. Vice initially titled the article, authored by senior editor William L. Cooper, Let's Blow Up Mount Rushmore. After fierce online pushback on a day there was a literal terror attack unfolding across the Atlantic, Vice hastily deleted the tweet and changed the article title to the toned down, Let's Get Rid of Mount Rushmore. This time with an editor's note at the bottom of the page attempting to explain the change. Editor's note, this headline and URL of the story have been updated. We do not condone violence in any shape or form, and the use of blow up in the original headline as a rhetorical device was misguided and insensitive. We apologize for the error. Rhetorical device, the content of the article still supports destroying America's most celebrated and iconic historical monument dedicated to American presidents. The author literally states he is on board should there ever be a serious push to blow up Mount Rushmore. This is a quote from the Vice article. With the President of the United States basically justifying neo-Nazism, it seems unthinkable that we will ever see a day when there is a serious push to blow up Mount Rushmore and other monuments like it. But if that day ever arrives, I suspect I'll be on board. Cooper further, not so eloquently, calls for leveling the whole place, and presumably all monuments devoted to past U.S. cults of personality, as he calls them. Demystifying the historical figures of the past, pulling them off the great mountain top back down to earth, where they shat, farted, shit, pissed, fucked, raped, murdered, died, and rotted, seems like important business for this country. As long as we allow these men to be cults of personality who exist beyond reproach, we're never going to be able to see them for all of their good and all of their evil. Disturbingly, the call for leveling such monuments is contained in the conclusion of an article with repeat references equating President Trump with neo-Nazis. Here's another quote from the article. Trump and his white supremacist cohorts believe the reverence some Americans have for these statues is simply respect for history, and that tearing them down is tantamount to ripping pages out of a textbook. Ironically, the Vice article does acknowledge the truthfulness of Trump's recent words that we are headed towards a dangerously iconoclastic slippery slope set to end in the demolishing of American history. But the Vice article at the outset essentially says, yes, let's do just that. Donald Trump says removing Confederate statues is a slippery slope that could get out of control. Maybe he's right. Would that be such a bad thing? Asked Vice. If a private citizen said, let's blow up Mount Rushmore, and published an article which seriously explored destroying the site, an article which is clearly pro-dynamiting the monument, what would happen? Who would come knocking? It doesn't take much imagination to know who would come knocking if this were anything but a $5.7 billion news organization. Okay? So I can't stress it enough. Vice is mainstream. Okay? It's disguised as this edgy, thing, but it's so mainstream. They're worth $5.7 billion. And that's investment. That's outside investment. They didn't earn that money. They were given that money to push an agenda. Kurt Mosbach stranding, the liberal left and its Antifa ISIS homeboys will be the historical wrecking crew. It's a good point. Look at what ISIS is doing in the Middle East, right? If you follow us here at Wake Up News, if you follow globalresearch.ca, you know already that ISIS has been funded, supported, and trained by the U.S., by our military-industrial complex. And what's ISIS doing? Well, they're killing a lot of people, they're terrorizing a lot more people, and they're going around the Middle East blowing up historical monuments, ancient cities, ancient statues, literally destroying the culture of these places. Now, I don't know. These Confederate statues, should they be up in public in the U.S.? Mount Rushmore, that thing is pretty offensive, right? It's ridiculous to take a mountain out of the Black Hills, an area that was sacred to the Native Americans, and, make these giant monuments to dead white men out of it, right? It is messed up. But at the same time, where do we draw the line? If history gets sanitized, if these things are wiped out, what is the benefit of destroying the history of this country? I don't know. It's a good question. The Confederate, the Civil War was about a lot more than just racism and slavery. I'll tell you that. Moving along, out of the Independent, the Art of the Deal co-author predicts Donald Trump is about to resign, and Newsweek, Trump is just 6 Senate votes away from impeachment. So who knows what's going to happen with Donnie Trump. But it's important to note, this guy, my opinion on Trump, I think he's the perfect fall guy. If the economy collapses, they can blame it on Trump. If there's a big racial civil war in America, they can blame it on Trump. If the next election cycle is a total disaster, they can say, well, we were just trying to put people into office to get rid of Trump because he was the worst. And it's important to note that Trump has been portrayed in the mainstream media as an extremely divisive figure for decades. This is a Time magazine. When I moved into my house, this was here. It's from January 16th, 1989. Trump. This man may turn you green with envy or just turn you off. Flaunting it is the game, and Trump is the name. Okay? So it's super easy to pick on Trump. It's super easy to pick on the KKK. You know, arguably these people deserve to be laughed at. They deserve to be taken down a peg. But at the same time, the mainstream media focusing on these things while they're pushing forward another agenda doesn't get to the root of the real problem. Karen J. Bowden chiming in, I always thought white guys on Rushmore should be replaced with Native American heroes. Sounds like a pretty reasonable idea. You know, there's the Crazy Horse Monument that has been under construction for decades, and that thing's pretty cool. But at the same time, it's like, where do we draw the line between humans blowing up mountains, like not, you know, blowing them up to sculpt them, and creating these giant monuments out of natural living rock? Might be better just to leave it alone. We're going to get into the daily. It's all about the eclipse. All about the eclipse. Funny story here on the headlines. Top front page, Eclipse backup arrives. They're bringing in more cops to deal with all the eclipse traffic here. Here in Alpine, 30 miles south of Jackson, we don't have a police force. And a few of our sheriffs have gone up to Jackson, so we're going to be short-staffed, I guess, during the eclipse. It's pretty funny. With no police, Alpine does have one old Ford Excursion SUV that kind of looks like a cop car. And what they did to prepare for the eclipse in Alpine is they parked it right in the middle of Main Street, and they put a fake dummy, a mannequin in there to make it look like somebody's giving out speeding tickets, just to get people to slow down. But here in a town of 1,000 people in Alpine, we don't, you know, in Wyoming, Alpine, Wyoming, we don't have a police force, and we get along just fine, right? Rachel Sahar chiming in. Sahar, ISIS has been killing Afghans every day. Who is going to stop these atrocities? It seems like whoever started it is enjoying the outcome because no one is holding them accountable except one country. You're right. You know, it's funny in here today, it talks about Trump and his Afghan strategy. Okay. Local news, the eclipse forecast, there's going to be somewhere between 20 and 40% cloud cover, says local meteorologist Jim Woodmansee. Hey, Jim, why don't you cover geoengineering sometime between teaching courses at the Navy and meteorology? In the opinion section, this is funny. File this one under double standards. Michael Gerson. Okay, this guy was a part of the George W. Bush administration, and he's going after Trump hardcore, right? The Republican Party turning on Trump, bashing on Trump is very popular. It's very easy to bash on Trump and the KKK, the neo-Nazis, you know, without addressing the real issues. It is ironic that Steve Bannon, the alt-right conscience of the White House, was dismissed at the moment of his triumph. President Trump's recantation of his staff-enforced moral clarity on the Charlottesville clash was a high point for the Breitbart worldview. About that unequivocal condemnation of Nazis, racists, and murder, never mind, the left is just as bad. Both sides share the blame. Okay, a little sarcasm there from Michael Gerson. This might be defensible if you leave out the 400 years of oppression, segregation, violence, and cruelty that black people have experienced in North America. That's true. If you leave out the bloody civil war started by slave interests to defend an economic system based on theft of labor and the lash. If you leave out the millions shot, gassed, and incinerated under the Nazi flag, their wedding rings and gold filings carefully collected by their killers. If you leave out every grave of every American who fought and died to defeat fascism and militarism. I don't know if Michael Gerson realizes this, but the most fascist and militarized state in the world right now is the United States. Come on, Michael. Pull your head out of your ass. But going on here, talks about how people like members of the cabinet need to be loyal to the president and support them, but eventually it reaches the time where you can't. It is not possible for a cabinet officer or White House staffer to comfort himself or herself with, at least the president's heart is good. I did not doubt that when serving George W. Bush, right? He's defending Bush. Trump has opened his own chest for all to see, and the cavity is horrifyingly empty. Every additional day of standing next to Trump, physically and metaphorically, destroys reputation and diminishes moral standing. The rationalizations are no longer credible, but resignation, in contrast, would be a contribution to the common good. Showing that principled leadership in service to the Constitution is still possible, even in the age of Trump. When loyalty requires corruption, it is time to leave. Okay, this guy, Michael Gerson, must have a pretty short memory if he served under the George W. Bush administration. As you recall, 9/11 happened under Bush's term, right? A false flag attack that killed 3,000 Americans, used to justify the endless ongoing war on terror that has killed millions of people all over the world and wasted a lot of money, resulted in the use of depleted uranium against the people of Iraq, etc., etc., etc. So, this guy talking about how George W. Bush has a heart. What kind of crack are you smoking, Michael Gerson? Kurt Mosbrock chiming in, chemtrails right in front of your faces and no one's asking why. Don't come to crying to me when you're dropping like flies. Kurt, you're a little off topic there, but I couldn't agree with you more. I think chemtrails are right up there as a threat to all of our health and safety. Right up there with GMO foods, the use of pesticides that are illegal in the rest of the world, right here in the U.S., etc., etc. It's a public health disaster, and we need to find out what's going on. John Palat talking chemtrails too. I'm listening, man. I've been pushing that thing too since 2011 when I became aware of it. Very disturbing. Okay, the opinion section. We got the illusion of balance here with David Limbaugh chiming in. Left shamelessly exploit Charlottesville for political gains. Good point. But, not that good. And here, they're removing Confederate statues. Who's next? And all of his advisors are like, well, Tony, you're next. You're next. Now, again, the whole crisis with Trump, the whole crisis with the KKK and everything, a huge distraction. Like Kurt and John are mentioning here, it distracts us from more important issues like geoengineering, like chemtrails, like genetically modified foods, like the effect of Wi-Fi, cell phones, Gwen towers, and other electromagnetic pollution on humans and the rest of the earth, right? These are the real issues. You don't find those covered in the Jackson Hole Daily. One other important issue, the driverless car, okay? Obviously, the movie Terminator, stuff like that, about the machines taking over. I personally am not worried about the machines rising up and waging war against humanity. But a valid concern is with further automation, what happens to all these jobs? And in Colorado, they're debuting a driverless truck for road construction crews. When you got people painting the lines or sweeping the highway or whatever, there'll usually be a truck behind them with the arrows that guide people away to protect those workers. Well, in Colorado, they're using a driverless truck for that now, which seems like a good idea because that truck is basically designed to inform people and take the hit if somebody's texting while driving, not paying attention, and could potentially run over a road crew. But the driverless car, an important development. These technologies already exist. The new Teslas and cars from other companies are already enabled with this technology. They're already ready to be self-driving. And if the law changes, there will be self-driving cars on the streets every day. So, interesting to see. Not even touching that. Like I said earlier, Bannon ousted. He's back to Breitbart. What did he say? Bannon told Bloomberg News that he'll be continuing to fight the same fights, just from outside the White House. If there's any confusion out there, let me clear it up. I'm leaving the White House and going to war for Trump against his opponents, Bannon told the outlet. So it'll be interesting to see. Trump weighs options for new Afghan war strategy. That touches on a comment one of you made a few minutes ago. What should Trump do? Should he stay in Afghanistan? Should he leave Afghanistan? I don't know. But it is the longest war the U.S. has ever waged, according to the Jackson Hole Daily. We've been there for 16 years. It's important to note that we're not in Afghanistan. We're not in Afghanistan to get Osama bin Laden. He was a CIA operative. He worked with the U.S. in the fight against the Russians back in the 80s and early 90s. Okay? Osama bin Laden, a patsy, 9/11, an inside job. The invasion of Afghanistan had a lot more to do with defending opium fields, defending the global heroin black market, than it had to do with defending freedom or spreading democracy. President Trump's arts panel resigns, citing his hateful rhetoric. Again, the rhetoric surrounding that thing wasn't that hateful, but they sure have done a good job portraying it as such in the mainstream. Boston deployed 500 police officers to prevent possible violence at a free speech rally and planned counter-protest, the mayor and police commissioner said Friday. It's interesting to see how the mainstream spins this, okay? Free speech rally. They don't call it a white supremacist rally. They call it a free speech rally and counter-protesters. That means they're linking all the Antifa alt-left people with an anti-free speech movement that doesn't really exist yet. But it's interesting, Boston free speech rally, they're not calling it a white supremacist rally. They're not calling it a KKK rally. They're not calling it a neo-Nazi rally. They're calling it a free speech rally, and alluding to the notion that there are people out there who are taking to the streets to counter-protest against free speech. Pretty disturbing. Pretty disturbing. A lot of fluffity duff. Judge refuses to end the Polanski assault case, a 40-year-old case in 1978. Roman Polanski raped a 13-year-old. He was a director. Okay, pedophilia, very prominent in the halls of power in Hollywood, in D.C., in the Catholic Church. It's funny, though, they always go after the Catholic Church for systemic pedophilia, but they never question what role it plays in Hollywood or in D.C. Why is that? Moving along, moving along. A lot of issues here, but we're not covering them today. I got to get outside, and you probably do too. The weather again, chance of rain tomorrow. Business news, stock market still around all-time record highs, but dropping. In business, concerns about the prospects for Trump's pro-business agenda, including tax cuts and infrastructure spending, weighed on the market this week, as the president and the administration were criticized for their response to last weekend's violence in Charlottesville, Virginia. Okay, can't stress that enough. Here's an interesting story too. We always have the right-wing media blames the liberal media, the left-wing media blames the conservative media, and Jackson Hole Daily, I guess if you took it all, if you summarize the overall agenda it pushes, it's very left-wing. So they're publishing an article today. The CEO of 21st Century Fox denounced racism and terrorists while expressing concern over President Trump's reaction to the deadly violence surrounding a white nationalist rally in Charlottesville. James Murdoch also told friends in a personal email that he and his wife, Catherine, will donate $1 million to the Anti-Defamation League. Murdoch writes that the events in Charlottesville last weekend and Trump's response concern all of us as Americans, as free people. I can't even believe I have to write this. Standing up to Nazis is essential. There are no good Nazis, or Klansmen, or terrorists, Murdoch added. Democrats, Republicans, and others must all agree on this, and it compromises nothing for them to do so. Trump has put the blame for the violence on both white nationalists and those protesting the gathering last weekend, saying there were very fine people on both sides. Murdoch is the son of 21st Century Fox co-exec chairman Rupert Murdoch, a Trump ally who the New York Times reported recently dined with the president at the White House. The company is the corporate parent of Fox News Channel, which has given friendly coverage to the president. Okay, so here we have the liberal media apparently getting into the personal emails of James Murdoch and using it to give the illusion that Fox News is turning against Trump, at least behind the scenes. At least, James Murdoch versus Rupert Murdoch, trying to foment internal division at Fox. Now, I don't support Fox News. I think it's a bunch of bullshit. But at the same time, this is how the media works, right? Important to note, Chinese government is moving to curb domestic companies' investments abroad in property, sports, entertainment, and other fields, following a series of high-profile multi-billion-dollar acquisitions by Chinese firms. Okay, we covered that earlier this week. What's going to happen to the real estate markets in all these huge cities like New York, Toronto, etc., when the Chinese stop buying up property? Chinese government saying, hey guys, keep your money here in China. We need it too. So that'll be interesting to see. The Food and Drug Administration has approved a new medicine for use against a rare, rapidly progressing blood cancer after other treatments failed. The agency approved Pfizer's Besponda for patients with the type of advanced acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Blah, blah, blah. The drug will cost $168,000 without insurance for the typical 9-week treatment course. Okay. Marijuana cures cancer. I hate to say it. Well, I don't hate to say it. It's just true. The U.S. government holds the patent on it. A guy named Rick Simpson up in Canada doing this thing called Phoenix Tears for many years. Pretty sure we don't need to spend $168,000 for a 9-week treatment with pharmies when we already have the cure and ways to prevent cancer. Sad. Horoscopes. Who wants their horoscopes read? Hello, Marita Thilsch from Germany. Who wants their horoscopes read? Again, I'm no astrologer, but at the same time, it's in the paper, so I read it. It's kind of fun. Important to note, as we go into this eclipse, if you look at, like, for example, ancient Hindu astrology, they say don't look at the eclipse. They say, it's an ill omen, right? Well, nowadays, modern America, the eclipse is just a great excuse to make a bunch of money. If anybody is watching this is in the Jackson Hole area, if you're a local out here and you are a refugee from the eclipse shit show, need a place to stay, hit me up. I've got some extra beds in my garage. I don't have a spare bedroom, but I got a couple couches. I got a big yard you can camp in if you are an eclipse refugee. Let's get into the horoscopes. Brian Peterson wants Aries. If Karen J. Bowden's still here, I bet she wants Scorps. I'm a Taurus, so I'm going with mine first. Daniel, what's your horoscope? I forget. I'm having a 3-star day. A conversation between you and a close friend is likely to greatly affect both of you. Potential for confusion surrounds you and others. Verify plans, specifically the time and place. Do the same with important conversations as well. Tonight, invite others over for a party. Okay, I got some friends coming in from California today for the eclipse, and I'm pretty sure I just did invite a bunch of people over for a party. So again, anybody locals in Jackson needs a place to escape from the eclipse madness, hit me up with a private message. Max Mogren. Aries, Brian, you're having a 5-star day, Mr. Peterson. You'll want to throw yourself into living life to the fullest. You might be pleased by how you are able to bypass what has been holding you back. Invitations come forward, some of which will appeal to you greatly. Tonight, do only what you want and have a ball. Okay, any other horoscope request? Pisces. Pisces. Thanks, Karen. I'm glad you're still here. Always appreciate you, Daniel, JT Jones, Brian Peterson, and all the other folks who tune in so regularly. Can't thank you enough. Pisces, for you, Daniel Reichert, 5-star day. You express the need to let go more and have a day that is a little less structured. You will see how energized you feel when that occurs. Learn the power of recharging your batteries more often. You will revitalize not only yourself, but also your daily life. Tonight, order out. And Karen J. Bowden with the Scorps, 5-star day for you too, Karen. Touch base with a loved one whom you consider to be very special. Your energy might be focused on a quick change and new possibilities. Accept the role of bringing others together as an important event. Demonstrate your interpersonal skills. Tonight, Karen, I know you're a big partier, and tonight till the wee hours. So, all of you, regardless of what the stars say, I hope you enjoy yourselves. I hope you have a lovely day. More fluff, more fluff. Masked experts join push against gerrymandering. That's a big problem, the restructuring of districts in order to have political outcomes. I have an idea. Since everybody's got a computer and tracking device in their pocket already, why don't we all just vote directly on the issues on our smartphones instead of having a representative democracy, which is a rather outdated notion? We could have a direct democracy or a direct constitutional republic, whatever you want to call it, where people vote directly on the issues. So, for example, there's a referendum. Should we invade Afghanistan and wage war against them for 16 years? No. Should we fund ISIS and wage a proxy war in Syria for 5-6 years? No. Should we nuke North Korea? No. Should, it goes on and on, right? Should we condemn the actions of white supremacists? Yes. Should we defend free speech? Yes, at all costs. Fairly simple, fairly straightforward. Turns out, even though a lot of Americans are not very well informed at the moment, if they actually had some legitimate power to have a legitimate outcome on the political process, literally in the palm of their hand, they'd probably pay a bit more attention. And people would do a much better job of attempting to inform one another if they didn't feel so disempowered, disenfranchised, and discouraged, and for that matter, divided by the mainstream media, by the corrupt political class, by the corrupt financial oligarchs, and on and on and on, right? Should Americans be paid a living wage if they work full-time? Yes. Should we subsidize the oil industry to the tune of billions of dollars a year? No. Should we increase the Pentagon's budget by $75 billion this year? No, let's put that towards local and regional and national infrastructure projects instead, right? I could go on, and we're through the paper. Of course, sports, the biggest distraction of all, very divisive when you got the Panthers fighting against whatever. I don't even know the names of the teams because it's not worth my time. Then we go into the classifieds. We got 8 pages of classifieds, trying to find people to fill mostly low-paying jobs here in Jackson Hole. Of course, there's no place to live. That summarizes your 2017 total eclipse coverage here at Wake Up, Wyoming. Again, we touched on the NASA scientists proposing geothermal energy development to save humanity from Yellowstone, the absurdity of the entire spectacle, and the subsequent media response to Charlottesville, and all the rest of it. Thank you all so much for tuning in. It's your boy, Max Mogren. I'm going to go have a lovely day. And I have to say, I haven't been sleeping very well the last several nights. I don't know if it's a result of just something personal in me. I don't know if it's because of the upcoming eclipse. I don't know if it's because of all the tension on the national level due to things like Charlottesville. I don't know if it's due to the international tensions of the ongoing endless war of terror. But I hope y'all are doing well, and I hope you're sleeping well. I hope you're getting a lot of exercise, eating healthy, taking care of yourselves and the people you love. And keep it up, and I'll do the same. It's your boy Max here in beautiful Alpine, Wyoming, thanking all of you. We still got 28 viewers at the end of this. So much appreciation for all of you. Thanks for your likes. Thanks for your comments. Thanks for your shares. Again, the opinions expressed here are my own, not necessarily that of Wake Up News. I'm one of many contributors. And in the wake of Charlottesville, it's been shocking to see how divergent some people's opinions are. I think it's important that we have a legitimate dialogue. We don't resort to name calling. We don't resort to trolling. We don't say people, it's important to say maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm misinformed on this. These are important things. It's important to keep it civil, even if you're dealing with neo-Nazis, the KKK, etc. I think the best thing we can do, if you really want to kill the KKK, you really want to kill the neo-Nazis, the best thing you can do is laugh at them, right? Getting in their faces and starting a street war is not really going to solve the problem. So, on that note, I'm signing off. Y'all have a lovely day. One love. Peace.